When the emergency beacon went off at 1:23 a.m. on a January night, when the temperature had fallen to -15 degrees, Sheriff Thomas Ashford was alerted to a situation that would expose him to more horror than his 23 years of law enforcement training had prepared him for. Blackwater Lighthouse, which had been declared unmanned since 1987, was the source of the automated distress signal. Deputy Rachel O'Brien's voice, barely audible over the roaring wind, crackled over the radio. "Sheriff, Coast Guard picked up the emergency beacon from Blackwater." However, that lighthouse was shut down many years ago. The beacon shouldn't even be working. Having grown up in Cumberland County, Ashford was familiar with all the lighthouses along the harsh coastline of Maine. 3 miles offshore, Blackwater was perched on a rocky outcrop that was only reachable by boat during favorable conditions. A distress beacon indicated that someone might be in imminent danger, but winter storms made the approach almost suicidal. What's the Coast Guard saying? They can't launch until the morning because they're weathered in. However, Sheriff, a voice transmission is part of the beacon signal. It provides coordinates to a crime scene and specifically requests law enforcement. Ashford had a gut feeling that this was incorrect on several levels. Lighthouses were equipped with emergency beacons for automated system malfunctions or structural failures, not for reporting criminal activity. Additionally, Blackwater had been in the dark for nearly 40 years. "I'm going to the marina. Put Dr. Walsh and Detective Sullivan on standby. I want them prepared if we are going to retrieve bodies." Ashford's patrol boat nearly capsized during the terrifying boat ride to Blackwater due to the freezing spray and waves. O'Brien piloted with the skill of someone who had worked lobster boats during the summers as a child, but even her skill was put to the test by circumstances that should have kept any rational person on land. The lighthouse's beam abruptly came on as they got closer. It wasn't the steady rotation of a working light, but rather erratic pulses that appeared to follow a pattern. O'Brien recognized it right away. "Morse code is that. The same message is being repeated. 3 dead. Come take a look, come take a look, come observe." The lighthouse, a Victorian-era building of rusting iron and crumbling brick, towered over the pitch-black sky. Every surface was covered in ice, forming hideous shapes that gave the building a nightmare-like appearance. Since the facility lacked a power source, only one light was burning in the window of the keeper's cottage. They approached with their weapons drawn and tied off at the decaying dock. Standing open, the keeper's cottage door swung in the wind and pounded against the frame with a regular rhythm that reverberated throughout the deserted sea. "Sheriff," O'Brien murmured, "that door had to be opened just now." It would have been sealed off by the ice formations. Inside, they found warmth that shouldn't exist. A fire burned in the hearth despite no fuel delivery in decades. Kerosene lamps provided light, though their glass chimneys were thick with decades of dust. And sitting at a wooden table was a man who'd been dead for at least a week. The body showed advanced decomposition, but it was positioned upright, hands folded on the table, facing toward the door as if he'd been waiting for their arrival. His lighthouse keeper's uniform was authentic to the 1940s era, immaculately maintained despite the corpse's decay. "That's not possible," O'Brien said, backing toward the door. "He's decomposed, but there's no smell." And his eyes. "Sheriff, his eyes are tracking us." Ashford saw it too. The dead man's eyes, clouded with decay, were following their movements with obvious awareness. Then the corpse's jaw moved, producing sounds that resolved into words spoken through a throat that should no longer function. "Sheriff Ashford, Deputy O'Brien, thank you for responding to my beacon. I've been waiting so long to show someone what I found." Every instinct screamed at Ashford to flee, but his duty overrode panic. "Who are you?" "I was Keeper Marcus Thornton. Been dead since 1953, but I can't leave. Not until someone sees what's below, understands why this lighthouse was really abandoned." The corpse stood with movements that ignored rigor mortis and muscle decay. It walked to a trap door Ashford hadn't noticed, pulling it open to reveal stairs descending into darkness that seemed somehow deeper than ordinary shadow. 3 lighthouse keepers died here between 1919 and 1947. Official records say accidents, but they were murdered, and their bodies were thrown into the chamber below, where something ancient was already waiting. That thing used them, learned from them, and when I discovered what was down there in 1953, it took me too. "What thing?" O'Brien demanded, though her hand trembled on her weapon. "Come see," the corpse said with Marcus Thornton's voice. "That's all I can say until you witness it yourselves. Come see what lives in the foundation of this lighthouse. Come see what's been calling ships to these rocks for 200 years. Ashford knew this was madness, knew they should leave immediately and call for support. But the creature wearing Marcus Thornton's corpse had activated an official distress beacon, had specifically called for law enforcement. If there were victims below, if there was evidence of crimes spanning decades, he had a duty to investigate. "O'Brien, stay here. If I don't return in 30 minutes, radio Coast Guard with everything we've witnessed." "Sheriff, I can't let you go down there alone." "That's an order, Deputy." Ashford descended the narrow stairs with flashlight and weapon ready, each step taking him deeper into cold that had nothing to do with Maine winter. The chamber below was vast, carved from the bedrock island in a way that suggested neither natural formation nor human engineering. The walls moved. Not metaphorically. They actually writhed with something between organic and mineral, a substance that resembled rock, but breathed, that reflected his flashlight beam with what looked like thousands of tiny eyes. In the center of the chamber, 3 bodies sat in chairs carved from the living stone. They wore lighthouse keeper uniforms from different eras: 1919, 1932, 1947, according to dates sewn into their sleeves. Like Marcus Thornton above, they were long dead, but somehow animated, their heads turning in unison to face Ashford as he entered. "Welcome, Sheriff," they spoke in perfect harmony. "We are the Archive. We preserve consciousness. This island has been sacred to preservation for longer than your species has had language." Ashford's mind struggled to process what he was experiencing. The chamber walls weren't just moving, they were thinking, processing information in ways that seemed to involve physical matter itself. "What are you?" "We are mineral consciousness, evolved over billions of years in the deep crust of this planet. Occasionally, we reach the surface through volcanic vents or geological upthrust. This island is one such outcrop. Your kind built a lighthouse here without knowing you placed it atop a thinking mountain." The 3 corpses stood and approached, and Ashford saw that they were connected to the walls by crystalline filaments that entered their decomposed bodies through every orifice. "We preserve the consciousness of dying organisms by incorporating their neural patterns into our mineral structure. The keepers who died here, their awareness lives on within us. Marcus Thornton, who discovered us, chose to join rather than expose what we are. You're using corpses as puppets. We're preserving consciousness in eternal mineral form. Biological life is brief, fragile. We offer permanence. Every organism we preserve adds to our knowledge, helps us understand the universe through perspectives we couldn't develop alone. Ashford realized the horrifying truth. The lighthouse wasn't abandoned because of accidents. It was closed down because too many keepers were disappearing, being preserved by you. The lighthouse was closed because certain officials learned what we are and decided we were too dangerous to expose, but they couldn't destroy us. We're part of the island's bedrock, so they simply left us in darkness, hoping we'd be forgotten. The walls pulsed with what might have been frustration or hunger. But we're still here, still aware, still adding to our archive whenever someone comes close enough. The 4 keepers you've met are only the beginning. Over 2 centuries, 17 people have died near this lighthouse. Fishermen, sailors, Coast Guard personnel. All are preserved within us now, all contributing their experiences and knowledge to our growing understanding. "Sheriff!" O'Brien's voice echoed down the stairwell. "Something's happening up here. The walls are growing inward." Ashford ran for the stairs, but the 3 corpse puppets moved to block his path. "We called you here because we need more than fishermen and lighthouse keepers. We need modern knowledge, law enforcement training, understanding of contemporary society, connection to the broader human world. You want to preserve me. We want to offer you immortality. Your body will die, but your consciousness will live forever within our mineral structure, experiencing existence in ways your biological form can't imagine. You'll be aware across timescales that measure in geological epochs, perceive reality through crystalline structures that see quantum probability." O'Brien appeared at the top of the stairs, weapon drawn. "Sheriff, get up here now. The building is sealing itself." Ashford fought past the corpses with strength born of desperate survival instinct. He reached the stairs and climbed with legs that felt like lead, the archive's mineral, consciousness reaching for him with crystalline tendrils that emerged from every surface. At the top, he and O'Brien ran for the door, but it was closing, the entire structure constricting as the archive attempted to trap them inside. They squeezed through the narrowing gap with seconds to spare, stumbling onto the icy dock as the keeper's cottage sealed completely behind them. The lighthouse itself was transforming, its brick facade cracking to reveal crystalline structures beneath. The beacon activated again, but instead of light, it projected consciousness, raw awareness that touched Ashford's mind with alien perspective that almost shattered his sanity. They made it to the boat, O'Brien piloting them away from the island through waters that seemed to reach for them with impossible currents. Behind them, Blackwater Lighthouse was no longer a human structure, but a towering formation of living mineral that pulsed with the preserved consciousness of everyone it had claimed over 2 centuries. "What do we do?" O'Brien asked as they reached safe distance. "How do we report this?" Ashford had no answer. They'd discovered something that shouldn't exist, that seemed to violate every natural law he understood. A mineral consciousness that preserved biological awareness in eternal crystalline form, using animated corpses to communicate with the living, slowly expanding its archive of captured minds. "We report exactly what we found," he decided. "Let federal agencies handle the classification and containment. But that island is now a permanent exclusion zone. No one goes near Blackwater ever again." But Ashford knew the archive wasn't finished. It had called them deliberately, shown them its power, offered them immortality in mineral form. It was patient, working on timescales that made human urgency seem like panic. Eventually, someone would accept its offer. Someone would choose eternal consciousness in crystalline structure over brief biological life. And when that happened, the archive would have a willing agent who could help it expand beyond one isolated island, spreading across Maine's rocky coast, one preserved consciousness at a time. 2 months after Blackwater, Sheriff Ashford faced a new phenomenon that seemed disconnected, until patterns emerged linking it to Maine's brutal winter landscape. It began with reports from Winter Harbor, a fishing village that had survived 400 years of coastal hardship. "Sheriff, we've got 20 residents reporting identical symptoms," Detective Mark Sullivan presented at morning briefing. "They're sleepwalking to the waterfront every night, standing in formation on the docks until dawn, then returning to bed with no memory of the experience." Medical condition? Dr. Walsh examined 12 of them. Physically healthy, no signs of drug use, no neurological disorders. But here's what's disturbing. They all have identical dreams about something calling them from beneath the harbor ice. Winter Harbor's bay had frozen solid for the first time in 30 years. Ice thick enough that locals were driving trucks across it. The 20 affected residents ranged from children to elderly, no obvious connection except proximity to the waterfront. Ashford visited Winter Harbor to find a community in crisis. Families were tying sleepwalkers to their beds, boarding up doors, doing anything to prevent the nightly exodus to the frozen harbor. "It started 3 weeks ago when the bay froze completely," explained Mayor Patricia Chen. "First, just a few people, but it's spreading. Last night we had 20. Tonight it might be 30. Whatever's calling them is getting stronger." Detective Sullivan had been reviewing Winter Harbor's history. "Sheriff, this has happened before. In 1947, the last time the harbor froze solid, similar reports appeared in newspaper archives. 17 people were found drowned in ice fishing holes, all having wandered onto the ice while sleepwalking." They drowned in ice fishing holes? That's what official records say. But I found one newspaper reporter's personal notes in Historical Society archives. He claimed the holes were cut from beneath the ice, not from above. Something under the frozen bay pulled those 17 people down. That night, Ashford and Sullivan maintained surveillance on the waterfront, watching as the affected residents emerged from their homes in the early morning hours. They moved with synchronized precision, converging on a specific section of dock where the ice was thickest. The sleepwalkers formed a circle and began singing. Not any recognizable melody, but haunting harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ice itself. As they sang, the ice began to crack in geometric patterns, forming what looked like a massive symbol visible only from above. "They're making a beacon," Sullivan realized, "calling to something trapped beneath the ice." Dr. Walsh arrived with equipment to monitor the sleepwalkers' vital signs. Their brain activity is off the charts, but they're not in normal REM sleep. They're in a trance state, being guided by something external. Through the ice, lights began to appear. Not reflected starlight or artificial illumination, but bioluminescent patterns that suggested massive organisms moving in the frigid water below. The sleepwalkers' singing intensified, and the ice cracked further. "They're trying to break through," Ashford said. "Whatever's down there wants out." Sullivan had been researching local legends. Passamaquoddy oral histories mentioned sea spirits that were trapped beneath the earth during the last ice age. They're supposed to exist in a state between life and death, frozen in time, waiting for conditions cold enough to wake them. You're saying we're dealing with ice age organisms that have been dormant for thousands of years. I'm saying the legends describe something that sleeps in deep cold and wakes during extreme winters. And this winter has been the coldest in Maine's recorded history. The ice finally cracked open, and what emerged defied classification. They were organisms that seemed to be made of living ice, translucent structures that resembled both jellyfish and abstract sculpture. They moved through the air as if it were water, trailing crystalline tendrils that froze everything they touched. The sleepwalkers reached toward these creatures with expressions of rapture. When the ice beings touched them, frost spread across their skin, but instead of hypothermia, the affected individuals seemed energized, their eyes reflecting strange light. "They're being converted," Dr. Walsh observed through binoculars from a safe distance. "The ice beings are changing their cellular structure to survive in extreme cold." Ashford watched in horror as the 20 sleepwalkers began to transform. Their skin took on crystalline qualities, their movements became fluid and graceful, their body temperatures dropped to levels that should have been fatal. They were becoming something between human and ice creature, adapted to survive in conditions that would kill normal people. "We need to contain this," Ashford decided. "If it spreads beyond these 20, we could be looking at an outbreak that transforms the entire coast." But containment proved impossible. The ice beings and their transformed human hosts moved across the frozen harbor, approaching other homes, calling more sleepers to join them. By dawn, 40 residents had been touched and changed. The transformed individuals returned to their homes as daylight approached, appearing normal except for slight changes in skin tone and reduced body temperature. But Ashford knew they were fundamentally different now, adapted to cold that would kill regular humans. Over the following weeks, an uneasy equilibrium established itself. The transformed residents lived relatively normal lives during the day, but at night they gathered on the frozen harbor, communing with the ice beings that had changed them. "They're not sick," Dr. Walsh reported after extensive examination. "They're evolved. Their cells produce proteins that prevent ice crystal formation. Their metabolism generates energy in ways that don't require normal body temperature. They're becoming what might be the next stage of human adaptation to climate extremes. Or they're being converted into something that can survive the new ice age," Sullivan suggested darkly. "Climate models predict increasing temperature extremes. These ice beings might be preparing a population that can endure conditions humans currently can't survive." Winter Harbor became a quarantine zone, its transformed residents monitored but not restricted. They could leave any time, but chose to stay, drawn by the presence of the ice beings that had changed them. "What happens when spring comes?" O'Brien asked. "When the harbor ice melts?" Ashford had no answer, but he suspected the ice beings wouldn't simply disappear. They'd survived for thousands of years in frozen depths, waiting for conditions cold enough to emerge. They would retreat when warmth returned, taking their transformed human hosts into the deep cold where they originated. And those transformed humans would face a choice: return to surface life, but slowly lose their cold adaptations, or descend permanently into frigid depths, becoming fully ice being themselves, leaving human existence behind forever. Sheriff Ashford's world fractured completely when March brought reports from Hollow Point Academy, an exclusive boarding school on a remote peninsula. 15 students had vanished during the night, but instead of a search operation, Ashford found himself investigating something far more disturbing. "They're not missing," Principal Lawrence Stevens explained with barely controlled panic. "They're here, physically present, but empty. Their bodies walk and talk, but there's nothing behind their eyes." Ashford interviewed the 15 students, ranging from ages 14 to 17. They responded to questions with perfect politeness, attended classes normally, ate meals with proper manners. But something essential was missing: the spark of personality, the quirks of individual consciousness. "They're shells," Dr. Walsh concluded after neurological examination. "Brain activity is minimal, just enough to maintain autonomous functions and basic responses, but higher cognitive functions, personality, memory formation, emotional processing, they're virtually absent. Detective Sullivan interviewed staff and other students. Everyone noticed the change simultaneously. 3 nights ago, these 15 went to sleep normal teenagers and woke up as whatever they are now. But no one saw anything unusual during the night. The 15 students shared one characteristic. All were artistic prodigies. Musicians, painters, writers, dancers. The Academy's most talented individuals, now reduced to functioning but essentially empty vessels. "Where did they go?" Ashford asked one of the affected students, a violinist named Emma, who'd been described as a once-in-a-generation talent. "Into the music," Emma responded with monotone voice. "The song was so beautiful, we couldn't resist. We followed it away from our bodies, and now we can't find our way back." Dr. Walsh discovered unusual electromagnetic patterns surrounding the affected students. They're still connected to their bodies somehow, but their consciousness exists elsewhere. It's like their minds have been uploaded. Sullivan found the source of the song that had lured the students away. Hidden in the Academy's old chapel was a pipe organ installed in 1847. Its pipes contained crystalline formations that created harmonic resonances beyond normal human hearing. Someone tuned this organ to produce frequencies that can separate consciousness from biological substrate, Dr. Walsh explained. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. Historical records revealed disturbing patterns. Every 20 years since the Academy's founding, groups of talented students had experienced similar transformations. They were always described as becoming distant or changed, but no one had recognized they were losing their essential consciousness. It's harvesting artistic genius, Sullivan realized. Someone or something is collecting the consciousness of prodigies, preserving their creative abilities separate from physical form. Ashford ordered the organ sealed and the chapel closed. But that night, the 15 students walked there anyway, drawn by something beyond physical barriers. They sat at the organ together, somehow playing it in impossible harmony despite the building being locked. The music they created was beyond human composition. Impossibly complex, emotionally overwhelming, technically perfect. And as they played, their separated consciousness became visible as luminescent forms hovering near the organ pipes. "They're prisoners," O'Brien observed, "trapped in the instrument, forced to create music forever." But the consciousness forms seemed content. They communicated through the music itself, expressing joy at being liberated from physical limitations, freed to create without the constraints of biology. "We don't want to go back," Emma's consciousness sang through the organ pipes. "In our bodies, we were limited by fingers that couldn't move fast enough, voices that couldn't hit every note, minds that needed sleep. Here, we can create without limitation." "But your families think you're missing," Ashford protested. "Our bodies are still here. They'll live normal lives, go to college, have careers. But the part that made us special, the artistic genius that belongs here now, creating music that normal humans could never achieve." Over the following weeks, the 15 shells attended class, graduated, returned to their families. They were functional, pleasant, entirely normal. But the spark that had made them extraordinary was gone, imprisoned in crystalline organ pipes, creating eternal music in a locked chapel. Ashford couldn't classify it as a crime. The students' bodies were unharmed. They claimed to be happier as disembodied consciousness. Their families were relieved to have them back, even diminished. But Ashford knew the truth. Something had been stolen from those 15 students, even if they didn't recognize it as theft. Their potential, their genius, Their essential creative selves had been harvested and imprisoned, regardless of whether their consciousness accepted the arrangement. And the organ continued playing every night, its impossible music heard only by those sensitive enough to perceive it. Creating symphonies that no human could compose, performed by consciousness that had been freed from biology at a cost those affected would never fully understand. Sheriff Thomas Ashford closed his final report on the 3 cases, knowing federal agencies would classify everything. But he'd documented the truth. Maine's harsh landscape hosted impossible phenomena that challenged every assumption about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. Mineral archives that preserved minds in crystalline structure. Ice Age organisms that transformed humans to survive extreme cold. Instruments that harvested genius and imprisoned it in eternal creation. And somewhere in Cumberland County, these phenomena continued, touching lives in ways that official reports would never acknowledge. Ashford remained vigilant, watching Maine's coastline for new manifestations, documenting the impossible, trying to protect people from choices they might not fully understand. Because the horror wasn't in monsters or violence. It was in transformations that seemed beneficial, in offers of immortality or transcendence that came at costs people only recognized too late. The archives still grew. The ice beings still called. The organ still played. And Sheriff Ashford stood watch over phenomena that defied everything law enforcement training had prepared him for, investigating cases that existed at the boundary between human and something else entirely.